Okay, well, why don't we go ahead and get started? And as more friends join us, we'll be happy to have them and welcome them in chat as they come along. So again, welcome. Thank you for joining us for the Achieving the Dream Student Success Parent Summit. And before we officially get started with content, we wanted to just review how you can engage with the speakers today throughout the summit. And there will be two main functions that we will be using. I think you all might be pros at this by now, but we're just going to go ahead and mention it so that we say that we did. So to ask questions, you can use the Q&A panel, which you should be familiar with. Right at the bottom, it says Q&A. And those questions, we will do our best to answer as many of those as possible live. I do encourage you to put questions there. If we get an onslaught of questions and we can't answer them all live, still put your questions there, because what we would love to do is to curate those questions. And I'm sure that if you're asking, someone else wants to know as well. And so that way we can have a great list of questions that we could potentially respond to the entire group with. And also to engage with your peers, to share your own expertise. Maybe you'll hear something and you say, oh, we're doing that in our location, or I know of a great program or policy or service. Feel free to put that in chat as we go throughout this afternoon. For those of you on the East Coast, I say this afternoon. Also, it's important in the chat panel just to remember to use all panelists and attendees as your drop down. So you may have something really great to say, and if you intend for it to go to everyone, make sure that you use all panelists and attendees so that we can see your contributions. Does that sound good? I'm going to assume that you are virtually nodding at me, yes. So we're going to go ahead and get going. We also invite you to participate on social media, and you can participate on Twitter using the hashtag, yes, Student Parent Summit, and also at Achieving the Dream, excuse me. And feel free to tweet. I think Julia Lawton will be manning our social media along with many of our team members today. So feel free to share your thoughts on things that you hear today and you see today. All right. Well, we have a wonderful lineup of speakers. You're going to see kind of how we'll go through how we're going to run through today, but we have a wonderful lineup of speakers today that are going to share their insights, their expertise, and perhaps even some challenge questions or thoughts. We want to be informative and perhaps provocative at times as well. The agenda at a glance, just that you're seeing right now, and we'll kind of show you how we're going to move through this afternoon. So we'll start with our opening session. We'll have a keynote. We'll have a panel from some wonderful students who are joining us today. We will do a short break. We'll move into our first deep dive session. We will take another short break so that you can get water and handle the needs that you need to handle. And then we'll come back to do our second deep dive session. And then we will take a very brief break and come back for our third deep dive session, followed up by our closing session, which will just be a few minutes where we'll go over some valuable resources. And we really hope that you can stay with us throughout this afternoon. It's a jam-packed 4 hours or so, and that's on purpose. We call it, we want to get you everything that you need in a condensed amount of time, because we realize that your time is precious, especially in this day and age. For where we are right now. And so if you can stay with us throughout the day, you won't be disappointed. And you'll see that even in our last few minutes, we're going to give you some valuable resources to help you not only be inspired by what you hear, but to be able to take that information and move with it. And that's what we want you to do. We don't want you just to hear good ideas. We want you to be inspired. We want you to have aspirational goals and things that you want to do for your students, but we want you to move to action. And that's really our goal for today. Does that sound good? All righty. And so before we move into the introduction of our president to give our opening remarks, I would like to thank there's been a great village that put together this event today, but I'd like to first start and thank the Community College Women Succeed Advisory Committee. And you will see those members throughout today in sessions, behind the scenes. They'll be moderating, they'll be facilitating. We want to thank all of them for their expertise and their support in the planning and execution of this event. And I'd also like to thank the entire Achieving the Dream team, the Dream Team here, from everyone who has put in place expertise, time, technical expertise as well. In particular, though, I'd like to recognize Meredith Hatch and Julia Lawton for co-chairing and championing the planning and design of this event. As well as our events team and our many other colleagues who are working to make this happen for you today. So I'd also like to give a very special thank you to Ascendium Education Group for their generous sponsorship. And that enabled us to offer this event free of charge to ATD Network colleges. So Ascendium, we thank you so much for your investment and your belief in this topic being important and for supporting us today. And without further ado, please welcome ATD's President and CEO, Dr. Karen Stout, for the opening remarks.
Well, good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. And thank you, Shauna, for that introduction. And thank you again to the ATD Dream Team. And Shauna, especially thank you for your leadership and creativity in pulling together and designing the event today. This is our first ever Achieving the Dream Student Parent Success Summit, and it builds on two threads of Achieving the Dream work that you may be familiar with, and I'll speak to in a second, and it's anchored in our organizational values. The two threads that the event is built on, number one is our Community College Women Succeed work, which was launched in February 2019 in partnership with the Biden Foundation, designed to lift up the voices of student parents, primarily female student parents. Community College Women Succeed also includes a unique partnership that Shauna talked about in her opening comments with national partners, many of whom you will hear from today, all working together to create stronger policy, funding, and institutional conditions to support the success of student parents. The advisory group has leaders who are committed to developing innovative supports and policies and programs, to researching effective practices and disseminating what we are learning, and in creating and disseminating resources to increase success for women students and student parents and their families. In recent years, our Community College Women Succeed initiative, and that is led inside ATD by Meredith Hatch, has hosted regional student success focus groups and developed student testimonial videos to elevate the student voice nationally. We've engaged thought leaders throughout the country, including leaders from our Achieving the Dream Network colleges, and we've partnered with stakeholders to create and to widely share resources and tools. ATD has also, with a number of our partners, served as a partner in the recent RISE Prize that awarded $1.5 million to solutions driving economic mobility and well-being for student parents. And we are partners in the College Success for Single Mothers project, in which 7 Achieving the Dream colleges have been selected to participate. And you'll hear from 2 of those colleges today. The second thread that the summit builds on is our work in holistic student supports, which calls on us to understand and center the student experience in our organizational transformation work and strategically blend financial supports, advising supports, supports for basic needs, etc., and to customize those supports to reach students when they need them the most to stay enrolled and graduate and move into a meaningful career that supports their economic and social mobility and the economic and social mobility of their families. This summit also builds on ATD's founding values of equity and our unwavering effort to center the student voice in everything we do. We may be known for disaggregating data, but we also are known for bringing a qualitative voice to data points, getting beyond disaggregated data and understanding the intersectional identities of our students. And for this summit particularly, the intersectionality of parental status with race, gender, age, and socioeconomic status. So let's take a moment to meet Antoinette. I don't think there's sound on this, Sharice. I don't know if we can go back. Or I may be the only one without the sound. Thank you for those of you that are putting in the chat that you also are looking for sound. Let's see. Let's see if we can get to the sound. If not, I'll move past.
I can get to class, or if I'm having issues with, I'm a mom of 4 kids. Being able to pay the price of a university, I can't do without going into substantial debt. And I don't want to do that. So coming here was the better choice for me. There's a lot of support on campus as far as making sure that I can get to class, or if I'm having issues with childcare or things like that, they're pretty understanding. And I'm able to still go to school and still have a life outside of school. The KEYS program has been very helpful. They help us with uniform allowances. They help us with money for books. They help us with finding different programs with like the kids where they can go in the summer, because I'll be in school all summer. So they were able to help me find a program that the kids can go through during my hours that I'll be in school. They have been so helpful. My kids are 12, 10, almost 9 on Friday, and I have a 5-year-old that'll be 6 soon. They like the fact that I'm in school. They kind of see it as, oh, most kids, I don't want to go to school. Well, I can now say to them, well, mommy has to go to school too. So I'm suffering just as much as you are. So let's just suffer together. And they think that's pretty cool. The simple thing is being able to say to my kids, yes, we can go to the movies this weekend. I just want to live comfortably. I don't necessarily have to make all the money in the world. I don't have to be the richest person. But a simple thing is being able to live just comfortable and not have to worry about how things are going to get paid. The best way to do that is to come to school and, show them that have a career. Don't just have a place that you go to for 8 hours a day that you hate. But let's make a career out of it, and it's something that you love to do, regardless of what it is. That's what I want them to see more than anything.
There are thousands of students like Antoinette in our colleges, students who work while going to school, while raising young children, students who still have dreams of working in a job that they can find to be rewarding and offering a wage that makes it possible to have what Antoinette called a comfortable life, one in which her family can thrive without constant agony over finding the money to pay the monthly bills. Antoinette's story helps us personalize the circumstances our students are facing, to imagine the impact of the pandemic on their lives. Antoinette's story was pre-pandemic, and to understand the effects of structural racism and that those effects are differentially disadvantaging student parents. Certainly, the pandemic's disruption to Americans' work and to Americans' educations is disproportionately burdening Black, Latinx, low-income people and women. And it's caused more deaths for people of color and in low-income communities. It's also caused more job loss in those communities. It's hit the 50 million women and men who are frontline workers particularly hard, as about half are working for less than a family supporting wage and have lost their child care support system, and frankly are risking their lives and the lives of their family members because they don't have the option to stay home. Our community colleges are seeing this disruption firsthand. We've seen it in our fall enrollment numbers. First time in college enrollment at community colleges dipped by nearly 23% this fall compared to last fall. Imagine these students managing college and life without the heroic efforts of our Achieving the Dream Network colleges and their unrelenting focus on retention and holistic student supports and pulling learner continuity through from the spring to the fall, the enrollment across our sector would have declined much greater than the overall decline right now of 9%. We also know that the decline has hit students who are Black, Native American, and Latinx, and men disproportionately. And not only are our enrollment numbers going down, we also have some new data from the National Student Clearinghouse that's troubling around transfer, indicating that fewer Black students are transferring to four-year institutions and that more community college students are transferring without an associate degree. Now that's troubling because we know that students who transfer without an associate degree are less likely to earn a bachelor's degree. And those students who have bundles of credits from a community college and a university without a credential and then have debt are those that are least likely to end up in a career with a living wage. Our partners at the Institute for Women's Policy Research have called our current economic situation a she-cession. Mothers are 3 times more likely than fathers to have lost jobs in the pandemic between February and August of this year. And of those who could continue working, staggering numbers have dropped out of the labor force to support their families and often to provide care for their children or other family members to support their children's remote schooling needs. Just last month, 850,000 women left the workforce compared to just over 200,000 men. And while the nation overall is regaining some jobs lost from the pandemic, several groups are recovering more slowly. Mothers of school-aged children, Black men, Black women, Latinx men, Native Americans, disconnected youth, and people without college degrees. This brings us to the urgency of being intentional in supporting student parents. As part of what Achieving the Dream's board chair, Pam Ettinger, calls a just and equitable recovery strategy. Before our students and student parents have intersecting and layered identities. Before the pandemic, many student parents were already living in or near poverty. Student parents were more likely to be working and to work more than students without children. Student parents were also more likely than students without children to be students of color. Student parents face insecurity in meeting their basic needs at a higher rate than other students. According to a 2020 report from the Hope Center, 53% of parenting students were food insecure in the prior 30 days. 68% of parenting students were housing insecure in the previous year, and 17% of parenting students were homeless in the previous year. Parenting students also are more likely to face increased financial and time demands. Student parents have caregiving responsibilities that are non-negotiable. And as we know, over the past 8 months, caregiving responsibilities have expanded for student parents and other students who may have new caregiving responsibilities. For example, many students are now caring for their siblings and or other family members. So let me bring this all together by naming some steps we can take as community colleges. We need to understand the intersectionality of intersecting identities and needs of our student parents and place that inside our equity work in our institutions. We need to design a college experience that meets student parents where they are which may require us to redesign our colleges. This work is part of our institutional transformation work. We should be thinking about adopting a bold new access agenda that reaches into our communities and identifies potential student parents who are not on our campuses at this time, and then connecting those prospective students with clear entry and re-entry points and pathways into our colleges. We need to be more forceful in working with like-minded partners in our communities to address childcare and housing and food insecurity, transportation, and financial needs of student parents. And that includes working on a state and federal policy strategy that connects and prioritizes connecting student parents with public benefit programs and increasing funding for federal childcare subsidy programs for students like in campus, and coordinating with state and local human service agencies to connect students with public benefits. We need to think very strategically about connecting with employers to merge the worlds of learning and work, especially for student parents, to create seamless pathways for these learners that result in entering programs that lead to economic and social mobility. Throughout today's summit, you'll hear from student parents and from leaders across the country, from Washington, D.C. to Portland, Oregon, from 2 Texas community college presidents, from 2 representatives of United Tribes Technical College, and beyond. While every state and every community has a different culture and context, what you'll hear from these leaders are strategies like those that I have described that you can adapt to your local context. You know, we just voted on Tuesday or earlier, and the way we voted looked different than previous years. We voted with masks. We voted sometimes by mail. Some of us voted early. Some of us stood in long lines to make sure that our vote counts. And while the results of the election might lead to change in public policy and practice for both higher education and with regard to the social and economic safety net that is in dire need of mending and repair for these students, what won't change is that our institutions will remain the anchors in our communities of vital importance for our students and our local economies. Even if college budgets continue to contract, and we know that they will, which we're beginning to see, our institutions will remain the most significant beacon of hope for Antoinette and learners like Marcia McCallum, an Alston Community College graduate whose story is featured in Jamie Merisotis's new book, Human Work. Jamie is the president and CEO of the Lumina Foundation. 7 years after starting her education, Marcia is now employed working in the biotech industry. And I want to read a quote from the book. "Sometimes I have to pinch myself that I'm in on something like this," she said. "I was finally able to stop waiting tables. It's been quite a journey. I feel so lucky. Now with a full-time job, with benefits, Marcia is hoping to save enough money to buy a house that can be a gathering place for her family, which now includes 4 grandchildren and 4 very proud children. Seeing my mom go through school after having raised 4 kids and essentially starting over is a kind of testament to how hard work and persistence can really pay off," said John McCallum, Marcia's son. From what I can tell and can see, she's a success, no matter how long it took. And that's her son. And this reminds me of why James Fallows at our Dream Convening said that community colleges are America's institutions of the moment. Think about it. Community colleges are America's institutions of the moment. We are part of America's institutions of the moment. We are the problem solvers of the moment. We have an opportunity to shape our communities for generations by accelerating the economic and social mobility, not just of student parents, but of the children and grandchildren of those student parents. Just ask John McCallum. So thank you for taking part in today's important conversation and for all you do to support student parents. And I'm going to pass it over to Achieving the Dream's Executive Director of Programs, pass it back to Shauna Davis, who will lead us into today's keynote, Accelerating Economic and Social Mobility for 2 Generations at a Time. Thank you again. I look forward to learning with you today. Shauna?
Thank you, Dr. Stout. I am so excited to bring you our keynote presentation this morning, for those of you on in other time zones. And our keynote speaker today is David Kroom, who is the Assistant Director for Post-Secondary Achievement and Innovation at the Aspen Institute. I will be your session moderator, and you will also have 2 chat moderators who are going to engage with you in this exciting discussion. And that will be Rachel Fishman from New America and Fran Carpenter from Achieving the Dream. So you'll see us in the background helping you to get the most out of this session. And so with that, we're going to turn it over to David, and he's going to give us a keynote presentation. And then we're going to have our 3 keynote panelists join us. And that will be Yoselin Amaya Hernandez from Montgomery College. She's an alumna of Montgomery College, and we are so excited to have her here today. Rashika Lee from West Michigan Center for Arts and Technology, and Jesus Benitez from the City University of New York. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to David. And when David has completed the keynote portion, we'll bring all of our panelists together for a very rich discussion. David, it's yours.
Thank you, Shauna. And thank you, Dr. Stout, for your great remarks. It really hit the nail on the head, and I think you'll hear some very similar themes in my presentation. Next slide, please. So again, I'm David Kroom. I'm Assistant Director for Post-Secondary at Ascend at the Aspen Institute. And I'm sure that many of you have heard about the Aspen Institute thanks to the Community College Excellence Prize that my colleagues over yonder, the next floor beyond me when I'm in the office, lead our College Excellence Program. But Aspen, we are a global nonprofit committed to realizing a free, just, and equitable society. We bring together thoughtful people with diverse backgrounds and points of view. We cultivate and support values-based, purpose-driven leaders in many communities across the country and the world. And we turn ideas into action and impact for individuals and society. Next slide, please. So we have about 30 policy programs at the Aspen Institute, and Ascend is one of those 30 programs. We've been in existence now for just about 10 years, and our focus is on, our mission is really focused on economic success for families. Our mission, so we see ourselves as the national hub for breakthrough ideas and collaborations that move children and the adults in their lives to educational success, economic security, and health and well-being. And importantly, we embrace and take a two-generational approach to our work, focusing on children and families, children and adults in their lives together. And we bring a gender and racial equity lens to our analysis. We have several different platforms at Ascend, but I will mark our 2 major platforms, which is that we have a network of, over 400 nonprofit and governmental agencies across the country who are at various stages of 2Gen implementation. And then we also have a fellowship where we've had 80 fellows across the country and also in the state of Colorado focused on implementation of 2Gen work. Next slide, please. So I want to spend the beginning part of my keynote really talking about what is the 2Gen approach, and then I'll dive into the work that I lead along with my colleagues that we call the Aspen Post-Secondary Success for Parents Initiative. So what is the 2Gen approach? As I mentioned, it's about building family well-being by intentionally and simultaneously working with children and their adults and their lives together. And I want to unpack that phrase a little bit. One, I would say that our work at Ascend, we don't define who is the caregiver, who one's family is. It can be parents, grandparents, other adults. So we use the term adults in their lives that are caregivers. And then we'll also see in this continuum approach that we're working with different sorts of organizations. We might be working with early childhood providers that are child focused and helping them think about how to add additional parent elements to bring them closer to the 2-gen whole family approach. I would say in our work, though, under PSP and the work that I'm going to talk about today, we're really going to be on the other side of the spectrum, where we're talking about parent-focused organizations, so colleges in this context and others who support college students and student parents. How can we get them to be more child focused? Thinking about additions of childcare, workforce programs, how are they connecting student parents to key public benefits and more. And so that's the lane that we're working in today. And our hope is that we can bring more of these institutions closer to what we consider to be a truly whole family 2-gen approach. Next slide. The way that Ascend defines 2-gen, we have 6 core components: early childhood education, K-12, post-secondary success for parents and employment pathways for parents, economic assets like housing, health and well-being, which include both physical and mental health, and then what we call the secret sauce of 2-gen, social capital. The idea is that low-income families in this country tend to be highly isolated and lack key networks to access education, improve job opportunities, et cetera. So how can the programming that we are supporting and policies that we're supporting ensure that these families are networked and are able to gain access to key benefits and support? So if they're encountering an economic shock, or something that's potentially going to shake them away from a job or from an educational opportunity, it'll keep this network will keep them aligned and keep them engaged and make sure they're able to deal with those shocks accordingly. Next slide. And then we have so many other, I guess, ways and ways that we describe 2-gen and tenets of 2-gen. But here I wanted to make sure to share that we have what we call 5 5 principles around 2-gen. And I bolded, importantly, this first principle because the way that my colleagues always talk about this is what makes 2-gen specifically 2-gen as compared to other programs. So the idea that you're measuring and accounting for outcomes for both children and parents is specifically what makes programming from that child or parent focus element of the continuum into the more whole family 2-gen approach. Other elements here are things that we believe should exist in all high quality programming and policy that deals with families. Importantly, engaging and amplifying the voices of families, and I'll talk about that more in a moment, but you'll hear from 3 of our amazing parent advisors after this keynote. Ensuring equity, and we think of at Ascend equity around a gender and race lens. Fostering innovation and evidence together. And then lastly, and importantly in this work, thinking about how to align and link systems, public systems in particular, to ensure that student parents are feeling supported by this work. So that's just a really quick deep dive and a really quick dive into 2-gen. And when I talk about 2-gen, how we describe 2-gen at Ascend and the work that we do in this, just in general. So next up, I want to go into more of our student parent work. Next slide. So this picture, I want to make sure to Karen's point and kind of, again, relay the fact that 2-gen is not just around the parent's success, but the success of the child and their future success. So this picture is of me, my mother, and both sets of grandparents on both sides of my family. My mother was a student parent. I grew up and born and raised in Miami, Florida. She went to Miami-Dade Community College. This is a picture of her graduating from Florida International, FIU, with her bachelor's in the early 90s. And she eventually was able to get her master's degree from Nova Southeastern. So when I talk about this work, I really am very much focused on thinking about how her accessing these educational opportunities provided me the opportunity to go to college, to be supported in my life and achieve things beyond what she was able to do herself. Next slide. So I want to now go into who are student parents. And I know that Dr. Stout shared some statistics initially as well, but I want to dive into some work that we did with the Institute for Women's Policy Research. And I believe the moderators are going to share the link to this report. But we did a fact sheet with the Institute for Women's Policy Research looking at NIPSAS data from 2018. And what we showed is a few different elements. One, student parents are a population that are majority women of color, just about 51%. And I should also state too, based off the data source, that we're looking at that students who are enrolled in Title IV institutions, accessing those dollars. So typically those enrolled in 2-year or 4-year baccalaureate pathways. So we're not looking, these data do not capture vocational or workforce pathways, just to make that clear. But we show the fact that if you look at, for example, all Black women like my mother enrolled in post-secondary, that 40% of those women are mothers. So this is something that I talk about not just from a perspective of needing to serve the most vulnerable populations in our country from an economic perspective, but also this has a racial equity implication and imperative around the student parent population. Next slide. And important also to note, and this is a pie that is all student parents enrolled in post-secondary institute, again, 2-year, 4-year post-secondary pathways, that 42% of that population are enrolled in public 2-year colleges, so community colleges. So again, this work really has a lot of impact and importance around community colleges and how they are, fonts of knowledge and learning for these students. And then I also want to just quickly mention that, there's also a fairly high amount of student parents who are enrolled at private for-profit institutions. So there's been a lot of conversation around the University of Phoenix's, and conversations around gainful employment and others in past administrations. Those conversations do have a real impact on student parents who are enrolled at private for-profit institutions. Next slide. I think it's important also to mention the fact that we don't necessarily need to be deficit-minded in this work and focused on all the barriers that student parents are facing, but importantly that student parents also are assets. They tend to have higher GPAs than their childless peers, although we know from the research that they experience this concept of time poverty, that student parents tend to have less time, about half of the time to dedicate to academics as compared to their childless peers. So considering their time deficits, financial barriers, we still see that student parents, when they're able to really focus on their academics, are really talented and population that tend to fare well academically. Next slide. And bringing this all back to Chu-Jin, we see also that student parents tend, at least those enrolled in 2-year, 4-year pathways, tend to have young children. So the opportunity from a dual generation, 2-generation lens is great. And we see here from this slide that 53% of student parents have children who are under the age of 6. So typically we're talking about individuals, mothers in this case, that this is about 80-20 split between mothers and fathers. We're typically talking about mothers of color who have young children in this work. And again, these are some of the most vulnerable populations. And so it's important to kind of really describe who we're discussing, who we're talking about in this work. Next slide. And of course, we need to just underscore the fact that COVID-19 has had significant impact on this population. Per a recent NPR Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and the TH Chan School at Harvard, it showed that 60% of households with children across the country have lost jobs or businesses or have had their wages reduced during the pandemic. So during this pandemic, we see that parents, individuals with children, are the ones who are being hardest hit and the ones who are still are struggling to recover after the initial economic shock that COVID-19 wrought on this world and this country. We see in particular, and this is kind of underscoring what Dr. Stout shared, that women, especially those of color, are being impacted at high rates. That Black and Native women in college are, and it's also just to kind of make this case too, that Black and Native women are in college are especially likely to be parents, and we saw that over 850,000 women left the workforce in the month of September, making up 80% of the total number of people who left the workforce. So just to underscore the fact, this is a she session, as what was shared by Dr. Stout and also my colleagues at IWPR. Women are being adversely impacted by this pandemic. And in particular, we're looking at women of color being adversely impacted by this pandemic. Again, the same population that we're talking about with the student parent population and those enrolled in post-secondary institutions. Among post-secondary students, parents face the greatest challenges to persistence and attainment, with children learning at home during COVID, in addition to financial and work-related obstacles. And my hope here is that you'll understand from the data that's being shared and throughout all that you'll talk about today, that supporting students with children, supporting parents is a powerful strategy to dismantle structural racism while achieving far-reaching societal gains. And so I think, my hope is that from this conversation and beyond, you'll see that student parents are a population worth focusing on and worth investing in. Next slide. So what's in their way? And I know that access to childcare, and it's not surprising here that access to childcare is by far the biggest element that student parents are facing. And we know from research that my colleagues at IWPR have done that childcare costs, well exceed the cost of tuition in most states across the country, cost of public tuition in most states across the country. So childcare is a really expensive cost for student parents. And there's so many different ways that colleges across the country have been trying to help student parents deal with this cost, whether it be access to subsidized childcare through public benefits, through C Campus and others, providing access to vouchers for off-campus childcare, making connections to off-campus childcare providers. There's so many opportunities and ways that college has been really thoughtful to connect this information or connect student parents to key childcare resources. I mentioned earlier also this concept of time poverty. So the fact, again, that student parents have significantly less time to dedicate to academics than non-parents, also a huge burden and issue. And Dr. Stout mentioned from the Hope Center research that that parents are experiencing food and housing insecurity at higher rates than non-parents. So again, important to note for this work. Access to healthcare, we know that student parents also have 2.5 times the median debt loads than non-parents do, student debt loads. So again, this is a population that are dealing with a lot of barriers, but have a real importance in our society and need to be invested in. Next slide. So so talking about my work, so how does Ascend really help build a field focused on this key population? And so first off, I want to just say thank you to colleagues at Imaginable Futures and ECMC Foundation. They have been the ones supporting this endeavor for the last several years. And it's been really a labor of love, really trying to understand what are some of the gaps that we see in this field, whether it be research, practice, policy, or others, and how can we at Ascend and at the Aspen Institute fill in some of those major gaps in this space. And so through the work that I lead, the Post-Secondary Success for Parents Initiative, we have 3 kind of core components, and they all connect to the levers that we're trying to impact in the post-secondary system. So next slide. So the first lever I want to talk about is that we have launched almost 2 months ago, a grant program that we're calling the Policy Acceleration Partnership Grants. And our idea here is to accelerate promising public sector initiatives to invest in the success of student parents by building their futures. So next slide. So Ascend is going to award $150,000 grants to 3 public sector entities. They can be state, cities, or counties, to work in partnership with key stakeholders such as peer agencies, organizations and nonprofits, philanthropy, employers, among others, that support post-secondary attainment among parents, especially single mothers, as this work is being supported by ECMC Foundation. The grantees will receive financial resources and technical assistance. And again, they're meant to bring together in partnership organizations from post-secondary, early childhood, healthcare, housing, and other supports for student parents. The lead applicants must be governmental agencies in the state, city, or county, but the partners can be colleges or other entities. So I believe Francesca just shared a link. Please take a look at it and share widely. And I'll also share my email at the end of this presentation. Would love for you to reach out if you have interest in applying for this grant. Next slide. Soon you will hear from our members of our parent advisor cohort, but just to kind of shout them out on what they are, as I shared earlier, one of our key principles of True Gen are engaging the voices of family, and Ascend is very intentional on how we do this. We do it authentically. We do it substantively. We do not just ask them to come and share out for a single convening and disappear. We really are thoughtful about creating a cohort experience. We've had 2 cohorts. We have 16 in the first cohort. Now we have 11 in our second cohort. And these are student parents, mostly mothers. We have 8 mothers and 3 fathers who are enrolled and are recently completed post-secondary credentials from across the country. And they are using their learned experience to share with policymakers, practitioners like you all, to help you think through what are some of the barriers and successes and ways to, and recommendations that they have to share in order to support student parents enrolled within your systems. And so they are engaged at all aspects of PSP. They've come to our convenings, they provide feedback to our publications, they do a lot of external speaking, but then importantly, next slide, they designed and chose grantees as part of this Parent Power Solutions Fund. So we did a participatory grant making fund where the parents allotted $150,000 to 6 organizations that were doing work focused on parent post-secondary success, but importantly, interested in how those organizations were authentically and substantively engaging parent voice and helping build the models that those organizations were funded. And so we had an announcement of 6 organizations, including 2 colleges about a few weeks ago. So please take a look at that announcement. And if you have any questions around that, please feel free to ask me later or ask the parent advisors as they really took this work on. Next slide. And then last kind of component I want to talk about is our post-secondary leadership circle. So I'm sure you'll see some familiar faces on here, but Ascend has a group of 20 current college presidents and chancellors and 3 advisory members, all of who are Ascend fellows, who have committed to using their influence and engagement among their campuses and peers to build supports for students who are parents. They've committed to capturing data at the institutions are estimates of parenting status for their students. They've committed to building or expanding supports for student parents among their institutions, and then also engaging their peer presidents as part of this group and others outside to really make the case that student parents are a population worth investing in. And I'm sure you'll see a lot of familiar faces here, as many of these individuals have connections to Achieving the Dream, but I'll specifically call out Pam Ettinger, who's the board chair of Achieving the Dream right now. And I saw Bunker Hill is on here, and then also board member and Ascend fellow Eduardo Padron from the president emeritus of Miami-Dade. But there's so many others on here that I saw who are listed. Some of the individuals are from those colleges are here on this call. So I wanted to say that this has been a really great opportunity and something that we really look forward to building with you all and with the presidents. Next slide. The last element I want to just quickly mention is that we, back in July, released a series of briefs focused on strategies and innovations to support student parents in different parts of the field, whether it be state and federal policy within a campus context or beyond. So this is they'll also share, the moderators will share a link with you all to take a look at this. But if you're interested in some specific ideas to serve student parents within your campus context, please take a look at this. Next slide. And this here is just an example of the creating a family-friendly campus brief, but we have some specific recommendations, some of which you probably already know, but ideas that will hopefully help you, generate things that you can do within your own campus context to improve supports for students who are parents. Next slide. So thank you again for listening to my keynote. I hope you're able to gain some knowledge around 2Gen, around the work that we're doing at Ascend and why student parents are a population worth investing in. I'll throw it back to Shauna and look forward to hearing from our parent advisors and taking part in the next panel. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Thank you. Thank you so much. All right. And now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome our parent advisors. So Rashika Lee and Jesus Benitez and Yaslin Amaya Hernandez. Please join me if you want to put your cameras on so we can see you. And what I'm going to do right now is that we are going to just move through some questions. A few questions for you all. And then as David mentioned, I'd like to invite you all as you're listening to put any questions that you may have into the Q&A panel for the attendees for our panelists today. So go ahead, feel free to do that and we'll get to as many of those as we can. So to kick us off, what I'd like to do, I'm going to start with Rashika. I'm going to start with you. And if you could just, in just a couple of minutes in your own words, tell us a little bit about your experience as a student parent.
Well, the first word that comes to mind is stressful because you're juggling school, home, and sometimes jobs. So I would say my experience was very stressful, but rewarding. I went to a couple different schools throughout my years of being a single mom when my son was still younger. I had a different experience at each location that I went to, but I did go to 4 different schools at some point, with the 4th one being successful. I would say it was really hard. It's just really hard, and without a great support system, I don't know that I'd have been able to do it, and that could be why I wasn't successful the first couple times. But I would say hard, stressful, but rewarding at the end of the day. That would be my synopsis of being a student parent.
And what I'd like to just to follow up with you on that before I move over to Jesus, you mentioned going to 4 different schools before 4th time was the charm then, right? What was it that was so different about that 4th time for you?
Actually, I think also mostly knowing by having those other experiences, not understanding what I was lacking as to why I wasn't successful. Going into that 4th situation, number one, my son was out of high school, so some of our responsibilities weren't the same, but also being more aware of what I needed and what I wanted as a student parent, and then being able to bring that to the forefront or matching myself with the program that can give me the things that I needed and I wanted. So I think walking into that last situation, being more experienced from going to 4 different schools in 4 different areas, because I went to a community college, I went to a university, and I went through like a credential like program. So I've kind of had 3 different experiences with 3 different type of programs. So walking into that 4th experience, kind of knew more of what I wanted, what I needed, and was able to lay that out and had a great support system. That's the biggest thing I can say. I had a great support system, and the school that I attended, West Michigan Center for Arts and Technology, they created a atmosphere that was very supportive. The flexibility and everything was there because they were practicing 2 generation before I was even aware of what 2 generation was. And I'll just throw in, I brought that up to say is because while I was in school, when I thought I was done being a single parent, I was fighting for custody of my granddaughter. So all this was going on simultaneously, and they were very supportive through that process with me. So it kind of lowers some of your stress level when your school or the program cares.
Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing that. And
You're
Jesus, I want to come over to you and ask you about your experience as a student parent. I know I had a chance to watch my dad go to college and complete his degree as an adult. And so how has that been for you?
Hello, everyone. It was very challenging for me, especially because I dropped out of school and I had like maybe 7 to 8 years of a gap, and I hated it because I always felt that I had to work harder than I guess like at the time I used to see the other students as normal college students. And every day was kind of always asking myself, do I want to keep doing this? At the time I was a single father, and just doing everything, juggling everything from work to school to helping my son with his homework. It was just like I said, every day was just like, do I really want to keep doing this? I barely have money. So it was exhausting, very exhausting.
And then to the follow-up to that, I have to ask you, so it's exhausting, and we had a little chat before we started about, I said the struggle is real, right? But what keeps you going?
I so I didn't know that I was doing a lot of critical thinking before I even started studying philosophy. And one of the things that I've realized was that I didn't have an emotional connection with my son, and the way I was living my life was the same way as my mom. Unfortunately, my mom didn't have the tools to go to school. English was also a barrier for her. So, and she always worked 2 to 3 jobs just so we can live by ourselves. So the idea was that, they want to keep living the same life as my mom. Unfortunately, she didn't have the chance to change it, or do I want to do something different for my mom and for my son? Something that I wasn't able to vision at the time. Even though my mom, she constantly told me to go to school. So, and I've always, in a way, wanted to show my mom that I was able to do it, even though studying was not my thing, and also give my son a different kind of life. You know, uh, to experience something else than just being in the same cycle.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And then, Yoselin, I'm going to come over to you and get your perspective about your experience as a student parent.
I think mine is really like a blend of Rashika and Jesus. um, my mom, she was working 2 to 3 jobs as well. So for me, going to school was definitely a must. But when I became pregnant, I quickly realized, you know, we don't have the resources to go to school, but I have to do it. So for me, being a student parent has been overwhelming. I'm still in school. This is my last year, but it's really really hard. It's been super super hard, and it was for me a little different because as a DACA recipient, there are supports that I have no access to because of my status. And so it was for me transitioning from Montgomery College. I always say this. When I was at Montgomery College, I'm at community college. I was living in a bubble because I felt so supported there. And I that evening classes were filled with parents, which were the classes that I was taking, and parents that I could connect to. And then when I transferred on to University of Maryland, I was completely disconnected. I'm still disconnected. I don't know a single student parent at my campus right now. And I've been there now for a year and a half. So there are two parallel universes that I've experienced now. And it's become a lot harder as the years have passed by now.
So let me ask you, I want to follow up on that because you mentioned as a DACA recipient that there were resources that weren't available to you. And then you mentioned at Montgomery College about being so supported. What were some of the supports that were most critical to you to being successful at Montgomery College?
So, for example, childcare, I think childcare is the most essential thing that we all need as parents. And I did not have proper childcare. So my children had probably like 3 or 4 babysitters throughout the week. So one day they would be with one family member, and they did not have a schedule. They did not have a schedule, which I think is super difficult for a child because they like consistency, and my children lacked that for so long. Um, and when I started community college in 2016, that's when the new administration came in. So a lot of people would tell me, I don't qualify for financial aid. So even if, even if when you get the resources, they tell you, oh, that financial aid, you can cover childcare through financial aid. Okay, but I don't have financial aid. I don't qualify for financial aid because of my status. So I couldn't do childcare at my campus that way. And then when they're telling me, you can get childcare vouchers, okay, public charge policy. I'm married to a U.S. citizen, so for me, I'm not as worried because I have a path to citizenship. I have a path because of my husband. But if I got any of those, if I tapped into any of them, and I risked not being able to get, legal status. So it was hard.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I want to just midstream here, I want to thank you all for your candor and your vulnerability and sharing your stories with us as well, because we so appreciate your honesty here. And then I'm gonna pivot to Rashika, and I'd like to know, you mentioned again with fourth institution being the charm, attending many different type of institutions. You are not only a student parent, but you were also parenting another generation of your family with your granddaughter, I think, or grandchild. I maybe assumed it was a granddaughter. And was there anything, I'm going to ask you this a little bit differently. Was there anything that your faculty did, your teachers did in the classroom that made it easier for you? And I don't mean easier in terms of content, but just that made it more easier for you to be successful or to stick with what you were doing?
I feel like they gave me a safe space to be able to release my stresses or not feel like I had to juggle it all without the support. I didn't really go a lot into it initially, but like when I went to school before, I wasn't at 20 something as a mom. Juggling everything was not that easy for me. I didn't mentally, physically, and emotionally, I didn't have the capabilities of being able to juggle full-time work, full-time mom, and basically a full-time workload of school. So it will always, work and home will always supersede school because I had to pay bills. In this case, when I went back to school and I was, started having issues with my granddaughter, because I did end up getting her, like you said, like Yasmin said, with daycare, I'm new to all this. My son is an adult now. I'm new to having to use these resources, and they were a source of a resource for me to get to other resources or to help. So I just feel like I was able to be vulnerable. They cared. At the other schools, if I didn't show up or I didn't come, nobody cared. Nobody asked. I just dropped out. I've never heard from any of these schools again. Not even a letter or anything. So I just feel like in this program, the caring, the acknowledging me and making me feel like I'm not just a body in a seat, that I matter and my success matters to them. So I think it was more so like the support and allowing me to be vulnerable and ask for help. I never felt comfortable to ask for help because it didn't seem like anybody ever cared before.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And then
Yeah.
see, you were given the head nod on that one. So I saw that you were given the head nod, and so expand upon your head nod. But I'd like to, maybe this leads into this part. You got connected to this Cooney Fatherhood Academy, and
Yeah.
tell me about that.
So actually, I'm not very used to asking for help either. I was so accustomed of working, and I started working at 13 years old. So helping around, even taking care of my brothers at the time, even to the point where I learned how to cook. So a lot of the things I did on my own for my mom, even like hustling, which is another story that I have to do. So when it came to the point where I was ready to give up a lot of the stuff that I was doing, the mother of my child actually told me about this program because she was attending LaGuardia Community College. And she showed me this flyer and it seemed like a scam. So I wasn't really interested. And the people there was so chill. My two mentors now, Raheem and Dave, who are still there, they were so open to helping me. I just thought it was so suspicious. I thought they wanted something, you know, something back. And interestingly enough, growing up at a low from a low income community, very underserved. You know, I was born and raised in the Bronx, so my borough is always left out. You know, in politics and everything. So coming from the Bronx, you know, and having these guys look at me and say like, "Yo, you deserve a second chance." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" You know, for me, it was just like, I'm trying to get this diploma, go back to work, and change the setting this where I was working at, because I was working at in the kitchen. I'm like, look, I'm just trying to get out of here. I don't need to hear anything else. And you know, they've never gave up on me. They actually pushed the idea of going to college, and thought it was I just thought they were, you know, full of crap. I didn't really believe them, and I didn't believe in their second chance, because you know, where we come from, a lot of people have already given up on us even before meeting us. So for me, it was very normal and very weird for someone like them to help us. Um, so yeah, that's how I met them, through the mother of my child. Um, interesting enough.
That, that's a good thing. So what I'm going to do, we have just a couple of minutes left. David, I'm going to invite you back to with the panelists. I'm actually going to, I'm going to pose this question to everyone, and then David will end with you. So for everyone, I want you to think, if you had, and I know there's not just one, we could certainly probably write an exhaustive book on the types of things that colleges could do. But if there was one recommendation, if you said, if you did at least this one thing to make it better for student parents at your institution. So you're speaking to, there are a number of college professors and administrators and leaders at all levels who are listening to you today. If there was one thing that they could do to make their institution better for student parents, what would you recommend? So I'm going to ask you each to give us one, and I'm going to go Yoselin, Rashika, I'm going to go to Jesus, and then to David.
So can you say it again?
Yeah, if there was one thing, so I know there's lots of different things, but if you could recommend one thing to all of the college faculty and leaders on this who are listening to you today, one thing at a minimum that they need to do to make their institution better for student parents, what do you think they should do?
I think practice more empathy. I think try putting themselves in our shoes. Because we often don't know people. We don't know them. We are looking at them now via screen, you know, a couple hours during the day, but we don't really know what their life is like on the inside. So I think if there was more empathy, because especially now with the pandemic, a lot of us don't know how to say things. A lot of us don't know how to ask for help. And a lot of us don't know how to be open. Some of us don't know how to be open like Jesus, Rashika, and I are. So it's hard, you know, when a student is falling behind, instead of emailing them and telling them, hey, look, you're falling behind, you're gonna fail the class, your grade, instead of adding that stress onto them, instead phrase the email and say, what's wrong? What is going on in your life, and what can I do to help you? And I think that will definitely help.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I go to Rashika.
I would say because a lot of the student body or population on most campuses, workforce programs, whatever it is that you're attending to get your higher education, I think it should get to the point, because most of them are parents, that they acknowledge us. So that means the campuses are changing, the needs are different. Start accommodating those needs if you want success at the end. It's okay to get the money up front and have someone come sit in the classroom, but you still want the successful rate at the end of saying that they succeeded and they passed this program at this school. So to get to that point, you want to design your programs and your essentials and things that the resources and things that parents, students need to get to that other side. They will have to start acknowledging us and those needs to be able to provide that. And I think at the end of the day, once we're acknowledged, everything else, the policies and resources and things like that will come into place.
Thank you very much. Jesus.
You're welcome.
I would like to say providing jobs for student parents in the colleges, because of course it gives them employment, but it also helps them build social capital. We've seen it with CUNY Fatherhood, and it works. A lot of the students that end up working at LaGuardia Community College are the ones who tend to succeed more, and the ones who work outside tend to struggle a little more than students who work in college. So I always thought that if we can provide remote jobs, but jobs at universities while they study and go to school, I mean, study and work at the same place, it will make it a lot easier.
Very good advice there. And David, what is your thought there?
Oh, they stole them all. That's such good ones. I think for me, if I had to, so something that someone told me a long time ago, it still resonates, is that there are a few kind of new innovative ideas in higher education. And I think honestly, some of the best models that we've seen in this work are really one-stop shop sort of models where it's the Family Resource Center at at Los Angeles Valley College, are others that ensure that student parents are able to know where to go to in order to get help, that can help them parse through their requests and understand like what they're asking for, and then get them that help so they can, so there's no economic shock or whatever that will kind of pull them out of post-secondary, right? So I think just being intentional about how you create those opportunities and those shops to really resonate with student parents, I think is going to be key. And there's so many other ideas I have to share, but that's the one I'll focus on today because the rest are so great. So
with that, I want to thank this panel. We could have gone on and on with more questions, and I certainly have more, but I know your time is limited and you have lots of responsibilities. And so on behalf of this entire summit and all of the attendees here, I want to personally thank the panelists for being here, Jesus, Yaslin, and Rashika. Thank you so much for teaching us and for sharing your truth, and for being so honest and so vulnerable. And it's when we are able to stop and listen. We talk about teachable moments a lot of time. We are so thankful that you showed up today to be our instructors. And thank you so much for your time and your attention and your willingness to engage in this conversation and in this event today. We truly appreciate you and thank you for that. And I see that coming in too in chat. There's going to be 885 thank yous, and we'll copy them and email them all to you. And I saw some resources coming in. I think Yoselin, you picked up one that came in for University of Maryland. I think someone put that in there. So anything that we have in there that would also be supportive of you, we'll make sure that gets to you today as well. And then David, thank you so much for your keynote. I know there was one question we didn't actually get to, but I'd like to send that out in the follow-up. So David, this one, we'll send this one as the follow-up to everyone when we send out the slides. And the question for everyone, just so you know, is that we're going to answer for you, how can you as colleges elevate the voices of student parents and leaders in authentic ways? So we will send that one out to you because I do think, again, we want you to be inspired, we want you to hear, but we want you to do something as a result of what you're hearing today. So again, thank you so much. I believe that takes us to a break. Am I right, Achieving the Dream Team? That takes us to a break, yes. And please take a break and we will see you back and we will get started with the next part of our content at 1:20 p.m. Eastern Time. Thank you so much.